Hi, Christie Blatchford of the National Post and Post Media here. And I'm going to chat a bit today about Julian Assange, the Wikileaks founder and very controversial figure, and just try and make a couple of points. First is, though what Assange at his very best, a state that he did not often achieve, I might add, but at his best, Assange tried to shine a light on what my boss calls the dark corners, and that is also what journalism at its best is. But I don't think that Julian Assange is a journalist, and I'll give you an example why. It was in, I think, 2011 that the so-called Afghanistan diplomatic cables were made public, in which a lot of stuff, which was embarrassing to numerous parties, was released the world over. And about the same time, there were two reporters in England who were writing a history of Wikileaks. And according to a story written in The Guardian in 2011, the two journalists took Assange out for a meal, and over this meal, the cables hadn't yet been published, but they'd seen them. And the journalist said, you know, it's not maybe very wise to release the names of, among others, the Afghans who had been either helping U.S. forces or talking to U.S. diplomats, because the publication of their names would put their lives at risk, absolutely. The Taliban, a murderous cult essentially, would surely have killed them. And according to Nick Cohen in The Guardian in 2011, when the reporters said this to Assange, his reply was as follows, quote, "Well, they're informants, so if they get killed, they've got it coming to them. They deserve it." And a silence fell upon the table, Cohen says, as the reporters realized that the man who had been hailed by so many as a hero and a leader in a new age of transparency was, as Cohen said, willing to hand death lists to psychopaths. That's one distinction, I hope, between journalists and Assange. It may not be a law that we have to be careful about protecting people, and it's certainly not true that our aim is to protect people. But in the course of doing our jobs, I think that there are very few of us who would ever deliberately, willingly put somebody else's lives at risk the way that Assange was willing to. The reporters succeeded, by the way, and the names of the Afghans were deleted. So that's one thing. I cringe when I see or read Assange being hailed as a journalist, because I don't think he is. He may have, as I say, some of the same goals, but there it ends. The second thing is that Assange, who was recently, taken out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he'd been hiding for about 7 years by officers from Scotland Yard. He had skipped out on his bail, claimed asylum in the Ecuador embassy, and had been confined there for these many years. He came out looking like, the Unabomber physically. I mean, he looked like a madman, as I guess would be expected. But it sounds like he didn't conduct himself very well as a guest of the embassy. He basically, according to unnamed sources in the Times of London, he smeared feces on the wall. He, rollerbladed up and down the halls. He had an endless procession of celebrity guests, etc. So all of that came to an end when the newish president of Ecuador revoked the asylum they'd given him and gave the UK police permission to come in. So he was arrested and convicted for skipping out on his bail, which had required him to show up way back in 2012. Anyway, in the course of that appearance, one of his lawyers, or one of the lawyers for him, said something about how, he just hasn't had due process. Well, I hold in my hand some of the various judgments from British courts that have come out in the case of Julian Assange. It began in what they call the Magistrates' Court. It went up to the High Court, and ultimately, not just the matter of his bail, but his potential pending extradition to Sweden on a sexual assault charge was upheld at every turn. He's had due process, baby.